I suppose I'd agree with the previous speaker that this budget and the government's approach to it has been all over the place. It's, I suppose, a little bit like the Late Late Show in that there's something for everyone in the audience, but at the end of the day, or at least at the end of the show, you start to think back and think, well, what was actually in it, and it's utterly forgettable for anybody. And I think that is unfortunately the approach that's been taken, perhaps in part by necessity. But if you take that view in it because COVID-19 is here, now is the time by necessity for direction, and that direction is markedly absent from this budget, other than, I suppose, some measures towards the green agenda and improving the environment. I want to focus on a couple of points before returning to the general, and one of them is the announcement of funding for mental health. 38 million euros for additional services was provided, which, on the face of it, is very welcome and badly needed. But then that's to be matched with 12 million euros for ELS, or existing level of services. Now, anybody who works or has anything to do with mental health provision would accept that the existing level of services, as paltry and as deficient as they are, cannot be provided for 12 million euros. So what is the additional mental health budget that's been announced today? Because to say that it's 38 million is frankly deceitful, because it is not. There's a total package of 50 million euros. I welcome that. It's certainly more than it was. But to say that it's 38 million more than it was is untrue and is simply playing with statistics. But we do need a ring-fenced budget, and all of the 50 million euros has to go to mental health services. Because if it's not ring-fenced, it inevitably falls victim to the apparent view in the Department of Health that mental health isn't really health, it's something else, but it's not health. Acute hospitals are health, and really nothing else matters, which is an approach that has ill-served us in recent years. Pressures dominated, or were one of the issues that dominated the last election, and the lack of funding for childcare services in Ireland. Now it's become even more onerous to provide childcare because of the necessary guidelines to help prevent the transmission of COVID-19, yet there's no additional funding to take account of that. It was already an area under considerable financial pressure, one where the state was expecting various voluntary groups and small businesses to provide what is essentially a state service, but not funding it. This budget hasn't done anything to address that. Likewise, family carers, of course, are under huge pressure. Because even now only 35 to 40% of the services which would normally be available to people who are in receipt of or who carers look after are open. The government hope to get that up to 60. I say that's a decidedly unambitious target. If you're looking, I mean, you know, they say, show me your budgets and I'll show you your values. Well, show me how you treat the most vulnerable in society and I'll show you your values. And people who are, those who look after the most vulnerable and the most vulnerable, to suggest that 60% of the services that were available to them before COVID is adequate or is the best that we can aim for is, I think, disappointing, to say the least. There are two major problems with broadband in Ireland. One is the fact that we don't have it in many areas, and I noticed one of our celebrity epidemiologists recently in the radio said when retail outlets were being shut down in the streets, oh, they can sell their products on the internet. Well, tell that to the very many shopkeepers across rural Ireland and the very many small businesses across rural Ireland who simply don't have access to any quality of internet. Now, there was an opportunity. We know that youth unemployment is a huge issue now. The lack of opportunities available to young people who can't immigrate as they could heretofore is a huge issue facing this state. Surely capital projects, and I welcome the expenditure in capital projects that the government have announced, but surely this is the big capital project of our times. It could have been accelerated, it could have created employment and employment opportunities. The second, of course, problem we have with telecoms is the appalling level of customer service provided by existing telcos. And Comreg is mentioned 3 times in the programme for government. Now, I don't see any announcement of additional funding for Comreg to keep the pressure on the existing telecommunications companies to provide an adequate customer service, because to date they're not providing that and they're in a race to the bottom. The general backdrop to the budget, though, is bizarre, and I'd agree with Danny Healy-Rae about members of An Garda Síochána who were ordered to go out and sabotage the economy last week, to keep people with children, people trying to get to ferries, to hold them on motorways, nowhere near county boundaries, just as a demonstration that this is a big state and it exists. But for a state to be intentionally, I appreciate that COVID-19 requires restrictions, of course it does, but to deliberately sabotage the economy in that way, to deliberately jettison sectors of the economy, and then borrow money to partly compensate people for their losses, is a truly bizarre construct. Now, it's the first time that I'm aware of states, and Ireland's not unique in doing that, but it's the first time states have taken this approach. It's not a change from a capitalist economy to a centrally planned economy. It's a change from an economy to no economy. And then we borrow money. It is cheap money. I accept it's cheap money. It's great. But at some point in the future, you have to, if not repay the money, you have to demonstrate an ability to repay the money. And of course, our headline figures are good. 6%, a deficit of 6% of GDP, but that's predicated upon an artificial GDP, which is based
on
us eating the lunches of every other European Union member state when it comes to corporate tax.
Thank you very much.
That, unfortunately, will not last forever.